Thank you, Ruby. How many of you are familiar with the word eclectic? What's in the movie? Squirrel? I've discovered that as I've gotten older, that term applies more and more to my daily life. And it's interesting, you start out to study something or to do something, and I'll be reading and something will catch my eye, and then it's like, oh, over here, and oh, that, and pretty soon I'm in part of the Bible I didn't intend to be in, and I'm going, how did I get here? So today when we talk about faith, if the word eclectic comes to your mind, it's okay. Faith is an interesting word, interesting topic. I find myself, I struggle a little bit with that word. I'm a very black and white person, And so when I go and I look up the definition of faith, or in the Bible, I like my translation a little bit better. I'd like to read that to you, our text today, at least 11:1. It says, faith is the confidence that what we hope for will actually happen. It gives us assurance about things we cannot see. Doesn't that sound a little bit better? Let's have prayer again before we start. Father, I just pray that as we work on this today, that you will increase our faith. As the story in the Bible, Lord, I believe, but help my unbelief. Help my faith, but make it stronger. In your Son's name, amen. Amen. So what do you think about when you hear the word faith? How many of you turned on the lights this morning in your house? How many of you totally understand electricity? So why did you flip the switch? I would say you probably believe in... do you believe, do you have faith that when you flip the switch, the lights will come on? Amen. How much control do you have, other than paying the bill? Okay, we all pay them. But other than paying the bill, how much control do you have over that light coming on? How much do you understand about it? But you have faith, don't you, that when you flip the switch. A little side story, our daughter, when she was about 4, she learned that she could turn the lights on in the house, about 3.5. And she would go over and she would reach up and she would jump. And if she jumped, she could just kick the light switch on. Now, of course, that goes with she hadn't figured out how to turn the lights off, and for the rest of her life, that never happened. But she would literally go through the house, and every time she would notice a light switch, she would jump and turn it on. And one day we had a power failure, had a big windstorm, took the power out for 6 days. We were without power there at the house. And she went around and she would hit the light switch, and she couldn't figure it out. So even at her age. So I looked it up in the Bible. I looked it up in the dictionary. And unfortunately for me, the definitions didn't mean a whole lot more. Have you ever done that? Looked up a word and the definition made less sense than the word did? But it says confidence or belief in truth, value, or the trustworthiness of a person, an idea, or a thing. Belief that does not rest on logical proof or material evidence. How about loyalty to a person or thing? Allegiance. Being faithful with one's supporters. The last definition that I found, it says faith, and then in parentheses it said Christianity. The theological virtue defined as a secure belief in God and a trusting acceptance of God's will. If you look a little bit farther, there's a word that pops up. It's called trust. Can you think of maybe that faith and trust are similar? Maybe do you have faith that the light comes on, or do you have trust that the light will come on? I think it's about the same. Have you ever heard, we're the bank you can trust? Or how about, you can trust us to do the right thing? Have you ever marveled at the trust a child has? Back to my daughter. Okay. It's familial. Our granddaughter, when she was, probably about 2, we had a really high mantle on our fireplace. And her dad would put her up on the mantle, and then he would step back and he would say, jump. And off she'd go. Wouldn't even hesitate. Put her back up on the mantle, jump, and she would jump. She trusted her dad explicitly. And her dad caught her every time. And just different. And so one day he's out and she's up on top of the motorhome. Jump. And she jumps right into her dad's arms, and he catches her. At that point, Mom said, enough. End of game. But Brita trusted her father explicitly. The Bible says that unless we have faith as a little child, we will not see the kingdom of heaven. Could it not say except that we have trust as a little child? Synonym maybe? Hebrews 11. What do we call that chapter? The faith chapter. Has quite a list in there of people. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. The New Standard Version puts it, now faith is the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things not seen. The New International says, now faith is being sure of what we hoped for and certain of what we do not see. All the way through there. What is it? What is faith? Something that you can't prove, isn't it? At least that's what it comes across. And yet I go, can you not prove it? Can you prove that your lights will come on? You say, well, yes, they'll come on. Every time I flip the switch, they come on, right? Okay, put that in the context of faith. If we exercise faith, if God has been faithful in our past, can we not trust him? So is it truly totally without trust, totally without any experience? No, it isn't. I think about the story of Doubting Thomas. How many of you like a name like that? Doubting Sheldon. Right? Isn't it interesting how characteristics end up being associated with, we don't do that a lot today. Well, in some ways we don't do it, but we tend to not call people Doubting Thomas nowadays. But Christ had been resurrected from the dead. The disciples had met with him, with the exception of Thomas. They had talked with him. And what did Thomas say? Unless I see his hands, the imprint of the nails, and put my finger in the place of the nails, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe. Doubting Thomas. I'm sure he hoped that what he heard was true, but he was not certain of what he heard. And as far as he was concerned, unless he saw the nail prints in his own eyes, he was not going to believe. He didn't seem to have much faith, did he? Can you put yourself in that story? If someone that you loved dearly was alive again, that had passed away and was alive again, and people were saying, yeah, talk to them, would you say, oh, I'm sure that's true? Or would you be a little bit doubtful yourself? I've often wondered, and until I read this, in this context, Christ was made perfect after his resurrection, wasn't he? Is Christ perfect? He still has scars. Why weren't the scars taken away? And we say, oh, it's because, specifically, can you imagine Christ saying, no, leave those. I know Thomas will need them. We say Christ, that God would do anything to even save one person. Suppose that throughout eternity, Christ is going to carry those scars because he knew it was what Thomas would need. I don't know. Gospel according to Sheldon, I guess. But, I've always, you wonder about things like that. Anyway, a little eclectic. Hebrews 11 says that by faith the men of old gained approval. Another version says that they were commended. So faith helps us gain approval for God. If you don't have faith that God exists, how much effort would it take to believe in God? Isn't that kind of the basis of, you start out? And the chapter lists a number of people and kind of what they had done to please God. In 11:6 it says, without faith it is impossible to please him, for he who comes to God must believe that he is a rewarder of those who seek him. Once again, if you don't have enough faith to believe in God, you're kind of at a rough starting point, aren't you? And there's Abel, and there's Enoch, and there's Noah, and Abraham, and Sarah, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. There's a whole list. And there's a little snapshot about each person. But the one that caught my eye was at the end. In verse 30 and 31 of Hebrews 11, it says, by faith, the walls of Jericho fell down after they had been encircled for 7 days. By faith, Rahab the harlot did not perish among those who were disobedient, after she had welcomed the spies in peace. In the entire passage of Hebrews 11, only three women are mentioned, and really only two by name. The first one is Sarah, and she's not really mentioned by name. I'm sorry, Sarah was, Moses' mother wasn't. Sorry, got that wrong. But Sarah doesn't seem to be a great example of faith, does she? What happened when the strangers were visiting and they said, you're going to have a son? What did she do? Laughed. Okay? And it probably wasn't just a, get the idea, she laughed out loud because they make note of it. And yet what happened? It did come to pass, didn't it? And here she is in Hebrews 11 as a paragon of faith. Did she start out with a lot of faith? Think about that. As I said, Moses' mother was there, not by name, but it says by faith Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born because they saw he was no ordinary child. And then we come to the last woman, Rahab the harlot. Are you a bit surprised to see her name there? Did you notice that her line of work almost became her last name? Rahab the harlot, doubting Thomas. Aren't you glad that in today's society, like I said, that people don't generally do that to you? Think about, once again, put yourself in this story. What would people tack on to your name? Fred the arrogant. Joseph the dummy. Who knows? But Rahab the harlot. And yet, here she is in Hebrews 11. she was greatly rewarded for her faith. Now Rahab would have heard the stories. If you think about what was going on in Israel, they marched out of Egypt, the sea opened, they walked across on dry land. When Pharaoh tried to pursue, the sea closed back up, destroyed Pharaoh's army. They lived, how about Mount Sinai, the Ten Commandments? That was a pretty big event, the thunder and the lightning and all that was going on. She heard the stories. And then the bad report of the spies, they were there for 40 days. So God says, okay, you're going to stay in the wilderness for 40 years. Side issue here. How many of you are over 20 years old? How many of you, I know, some of you are more eager to admit it than others. All right. Look around the church here, and I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 6 people that are under 20 years of age. Right? All the rest of you would have died out before you got to the promised land. Only those 6 would have gone, or would have had the potential of making it to the promised land. If you're over 20, you were out. So for 40 years, and how did they live in the wilderness? What did God do for them for that 40 years? Fed them manna? They were taken care of. How many of them had to replace their shoes during that 40 years? I live on a gravel road. I live on a gravel driveway. I have gravel in my front lawn. I'd like to have grass in my front lawn, but it's mostly gravel. I go through shoes about every 4 months. I get to buy another pair of tennis shoes. I just wear them down. 40 years in the wilderness, and not one sandal had to be replaced. Rahab heard those stories. And so she started to wonder, I'm sure, about this God of Israel. And so now here we are 40 years later. And once more, the people are just on the other side of the Jordan River. And when they cross that Jordan River, how many of them were there? How many Israelites were there? A million is a number that gets thrown around. How many people in the entire city of Lebanon? 14,000? That's like 1% of a million. So 100 times bigger than Lebanon. And they're all camped on the other side of the Gasconade River. That's a pretty good sized group. And they're the first city. When that group of people come across the Jordan River, the first city they're going to come to is Jericho. Now there's a speculation when you study about Rahab. There is a speculation that she was an innkeeper. Sort of the legitimate side of her business ventures. And her inn was conveniently located between the walls of Jericho. It was a fortified city, and it had literally 2 walls, an outer wall and an inner wall. And if you could breach the outer wall, you still had to make it through the second one. Someone told me the best way to keep deer out of your garden is you build 2 fences. They don't have to be very high, but they're supposed to be about 10 feet apart. Because the deer can jump, a 10-foot fence, a deer can jump, no problem. But if there's 2 fences, they can't do the double hop thing. Now, I may not have the dimensions exactly right, but that's the concept. So they had a double wall to protect the city. And I love that, her inn was conveniently located. Sounds like a sales pitch, doesn't it? And when those spies showed up to her place, stayed at her inn, she went to them and said, I know why you're here. I've heard the stories. I've heard about the miracles. Their God was more than a story to Rahab. She had a belief. She had a level of faith that he was the true God. Israel had lived through all of those miracles. And yet what did they do consistently? Complain? Moan? She had only read about them, or heard about them, probably not read about them, but only heard about them. And yet she believed. Israel lived the miracles and didn't believe. She heard and chose to believe. Now, you know the story. The word gets out. We have spies in our midst. And they're located at that inn that is conveniently located between the city walls. And so they show up at her door, and she says, oh, no, they went that away hours ago. And if you hurry, you might catch them. And she lets them out the window with a scarlet cord. And she says, go hide for 3 days, let it die down, and then you can head back to Israel. She says, but what did she want? Salvation? She said, spare me and my family. And they did. She shows her strong faith in God by making a special request. She asked that she and her family be spared. But there was a condition to her salvation. What was it? Scarlet cord out the window, and everyone you want saved had better be in your place, in your house. She couldn't just give them a list. Here, I've got relatives scattered all over the city. No. We will honor your request. And when you read the story, and if you have a chance, go and read in Joshua the story. It's fascinating, that she asks for that, and the spies say, we will do it. On our lives, we will do it. We will pledge our lives that it will be done. But if you tell on us, the contract's void. There was actually a relationship going on there, a contract, a covenant, if you please. And so she's there. And she puts out that cord, and I have a hunch. What would you throw out a little cord? Would you, little, I'd have something about this big around, right? I have just bought up every piece of scarlet I could find in that city. And it would be out the window. In fact, you couldn't use the window anymore because of what was coming out of the window. Let's not miss that one. She didn't say, oh yeah, I'll just stick this, I've got this yarn I didn't use. I'll, stick that. No. I can see her. And what about getting her family to come? Okay, put yourself in Rahab's position. And you have a commitment from that 1 million people on the other side of the Gasconade River that if they're in your house, they will be spared. Are you going to put on your salesman hat and sell that to your relatives? Now, I think that it wasn't that big of a challenge, because when you read in the Bible what she says to let's see if I can. What she says is that the people in the town, she tells the spies, everyone is terrified of the Israelites. So it probably wasn't a big sales thing. But they had to be in the house. And once again, put yourself in that story of hitting up your relatives, of convincing them, of maybe getting rid of some of the stuff in your house so more people would fit. You know, would you want all of your relatives? That's the other thing. Would you want all of your relatives saved? Who did she pick? As I say, these are real people. They're real stories in the Bible. So what happens? The Israelites cross the Jordan, and they show up, and what do? Once around the city, and they all go home. The first day? Day one, they went around the city once. 7 times on the first day? No. Yeah, the 7th day they did 7 times. On the first day, oh, you're going to mess me up now. All right. So they went around one time and then went back. And can you imagine the stress in the city? You know, the guards, can you imagine standing there all day long like this with your bow and arrow and nothing happens? You're going to get a shoulder cramp from holding the bow. It's what happens the second day. Shut up, around. And what were they doing? Were they shouting insults at the people in Jericho? Had to actually be quiet, didn't they? Okay, walk softly. So, can you imagine thousands of, and I don't know that the women and children showed up. I'm not real sure about it. Was it just the men of the camp? I'm not sure, but thousands and thousands of people. If it were just the men, over 40 years old, we're talking big numbers here. One time around and back to camp. The next day, one time around and back to camp. I wonder what was going on in the city about day 5 or 6. Do you think they were getting complacent? I love stories of World War II, and I have a book called The Enola Gay. It was written by Colonel Tibbets, the pilot that flew the Enola Gay, the bomber that dropped the bomb on Hiroshima in World War II. And it talks about in there that for weeks ahead of time, they would fly one of the bombers, they would take off of Tinian, and they would fly to Japan 12 and a half hours. They would pick a city, and they would drop a bomb on that city. And the bomb happened to be filled with black powder. So when it blew up, it didn't do a whole lot of damage, but it was really visible on photographs that the other planes were taking. They were doing test runs. They never bombed Hiroshima or Nagasaki. But they would send out one plane, would drop a bomb, and turn around and come 12 and a half hours back home. And they would do that time after time. And what they were doing was practicing. All right? And Tibbets in his book says that the day they dropped the bomb, Hiroshima did not sound any air raid sirens. They did not send up one plane to intercept them. Because how much damage could one plane do to a city? And because of that, they were kind of caught off guard. So here are the Israelites, one time around. And I think that on day 6, Jericho was finally going, this isn't going to happen. There's not going to be much go on here. They're going to bore us to death. But then on day 7, now John, how many times did they go around the city? Okay. But on the 7th day in the final circuit, rather than turning back, what did they do? Second time. Wonder how long it took them to actually walk around the city? An hour maybe? You know, cities weren't quite as big in those days as they are today, but anyway, so this, second time. Do you think they caught the people's attention? I personally think that about 6 or 7, well, about 5 or 6, let's say that about 5 or 6, everybody on the city was up on the walls. It was like, hey, they're doing something different. And everybody rushed up on the walls to see what in the world's going on. This is different. This didn't happen yesterday. And so when the walls came down, how much of Jericho's walls fell? No. You're wrong. There was a section of the wall that did not come down. It had a red cord hanging out of the window. See, if we think about that, all the walls not all the walls of Jericho came down. There was a section that did not fall. And because everybody was standing on the wall, there was a lot less people to fight in the scheme of things. So what was Rahab's reward for her faith? Did she live? Her life was saved. How about her parents? How about her children? I mean, we don't know who her family was, but they were saved. When I look at the story, that was one reward. But the biggest reward that I think is found in Hebrews 11. Actually, it's found, she's in Hebrews 11, but her second reward is found in Matthew 1. And in Matthew 1, it lists the genealogy of Christ. And her name is there. Rahab the harlot. Another text that I came by that I'd like to share with you. One of those, look. In Joshua 6 in my Bible, it says the Israelites burned the town and everything in it, only things that were made of silver, gold, and bronze kept for the treasury of the Lord. So Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute and her relatives who were with her in the house because she had hidden the spies sent to Jericho. And this is the sentence I love. And she lives among the Israelites to this day. Is that cool? It wasn't, no. It says right here, and she lives with the Israelites to this day. When this book was written, she was still alive and still living with the Israelites. Just think that's kind of cool, kind of a personal, Do you think she had a testimony? And yet, I love it. I love God's grace. What does Joshua say here? So Joshua spared Rahab, the converted person who is a Christian now. Is that what the text says? Rahab the prostitute and her relatives. She didn't get rid of that name, did she? This is after the fact. This is after she showed great faith. She saved her family, and it's still Rahab the prostitute. That's just not going to go away. But because of her faith, once again, when you look at the genealogy of Christ, when you look at genealogy in general in the Bible, it's man-dominated. We list all the fathers, don't we? When you look at how many sisters did Joseph have? Zero? One? Yeah, one that we know of. So do you think, what are the odds of having 13 children and only one girl? I mean, it's possible, right? But I have a hunch that there were more. They don't spend a lot of time. And yet, once again, here is Rahab the prostitute, Rahab the harlot, and they mention her by name. And when you read that genealogy, it doesn't say, it says Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers. It doesn't even say Abraham and Sarah. It doesn't say Isaac and Rahab. Isaac and Rebekah. But specifically, Rahab is mentioned. So she obviously was a perfect person, right? We know it isn't true because what was her name again? Rahab the prostitute, okay? And yet, she is mentioned by name in several places in the Bible. Rahab the harlot was the great grandmother of Jesus. I'm amazed with God's grace. Amen. Many times during Christ's earthly ministry, he encounters Gentiles. And what does he typically say? There's one case where he says, I have never seen any faith like this in all of Israel. It wasn't, well, this person's got as much faith as the saved. This person has as much faith as the God's chosen people. It doesn't say that, does he? I haven't seen this much faith in all of God's chosen people. And they're a Gentile. He delighted in ministering to the Gentiles. And he rewarded Rahab's special faith. Had Rachel seen God? Had she seen the Israelites? She might have seen the two spies, but to that point, did she already have faith in God? Do you think she had a conversion experience the night the spies showed up, or do you think she had been working on that? I think she'd been working on that. I think she was prepared when the spies showed up to make that decision. And what did God do about her faith? Did he reward it? And I keep coming back to all the way through Rahab the prostitute. Rahab, could we not just change that and say Rahab the sinner? Maybe that's a little more politically correct, right? We could just say sinner. We don't have to be real specific there. She was given the honor of being an ancestor to the Savior of the world because of her faith and because of her trust. So once again, what about us? Do you feel like maybe you're stuck in a sin pattern? Maybe one that almost becomes part of your name? And we laugh, but, Sarah the liar, or Joe the thief, or Sheldon the doubtful. Is that where we are? Maybe our society doesn't throw that around as much as it used to, but I'm sure that we could feel that way. And maybe because of that, you feel like you can't escape the walls of sin around you. But take the story of Rahab to heart. Let God rescue you from your walls of sin. Trust in him, even though, how many of you have seen the Lord? Anybody? How many of you met Jesus? Physically, not been converted, but how many of you met Jesus? How many of you have faith to believe that even though you haven't seen the nail prints, that he can save you from sin? Let God rescue you, and then watch what kind of special blessings he has in store for you. God loves to honor our faith.